class is a continuation of our exploration of Scrabble, and I think आज we're going to look at a slightly different aspect of the game. So let's start with today's lecture. Today's lecture is about dogs. You've learned a great deal about large language models. You've learned a great deal about ChatGPT. You've learned a great deal about how large language models sort of predict words. So if I give you a phrase and I put it in front of you, what would be your response? And the phrase that I have for you is, let's see, G is Excel. So complete the sentence. Let me switch the context. With respect to word generation, you know, when I give you word generation and I give you is Excel, how does that come together? For those of you saying who's asking, you know, is Excel efficient? Is Excel good for computing? Is Excel the right program? Do you think the answer is yes or the answer is no? If Excel is painful, Excel is not efficient, Excel is not the best possible path, then why are we working with Excel? हम Excel के साथ क्यों काम करें? What's the reason? We wouldn't have learned the process of debugging, trial and error. To answer some of your responses, Excel is not efficient, Excel is not the best possible choice, Excel is not the greatest of tools, especially for work along the lines of what we're doing with word generation. But I think there are two key points that we wanted to make when you worked with Excel. One is that आपने अभी, I think you've done, most of you've done 5 letters, right? Last year when we did this work, we did close to about, I think we did 7 letters. And given the nature of the game, as and when we play Scrabble, you know for a fact that if you have a slate of, let's say, 7 letters and you have another 15-20 possible anchors, then the number of combinations can actually go beyond 7 letters. You can easily do 8, 9, 10 letters also. And especially when you're looking at bingos, when you use all 7 tiles, and especially when you're using existing anchors on the board to sort of complete the word, it's possible that you might actually end up with a 9 or a 10 or 11 letter word. I think the bigger question is, one of the biggest reasons why we wanted to explore Excel or start with Excel was we wanted to look at, first we wanted to look at what is the wrong way of doing things, right? So when it comes to word generation, Excel's, the approach that we've used is called the brute force approach. And I think the reason why we wanted to start off with the brute force approach was that for you to appreciate grace and elegance, for you to appreciate efficiency, for you to appreciate how fast the right way of doing things is, you first have to figure out how the slow way works, how frustrating the slow way is. And I think the Excel word gen experiment is partly the slow way, partly the frustrating way. But as some of you pointed out, you know, it's also a really easy and great way to establish 2 or 3 of the key points that work in the cycle of computational thinking, which is it's a great way to understand the challenge that you have to solve. It's a great way to map out a solution. It's a good way to sort of test out an approach to attacking and solving that solution. And then it's also a great way to trace through and see through the exact sequence of steps with the output produced that you can go through it. एक चीज़ हमने और देखी थी जो आपने, that you might have seen in the first week of assessment, which was your original diagnostic assessment. You had a sequence of instructions where if you used Excel or a sheet of paper to trace through the values, you may find that Excel is also a great tool to trace through the steps or the sequence of an algorithm. And more importantly, अभी आपका अगले हफ्ते एक और, you've got another piece coming up, which is going to use pivot tables and a more detailed data set. So you'll actually use Excel for what Excel is supposed to be used for, which is working with data, calculating and tabulating results. And I think the word gen exercise is a great way to sort of get familiar with Excel, familiar with both the pros and cons of Excel. And by the time you get to the data set exercise, the pivot table exercise, which will most likely happen next week or the week after, you will find that, you know, जो शुरू में जो आपकी कबाहत थी या challenges थे या issues थे with respect to working with Excel, they would have been addressed. So that's the first part. I think the second part for our, think in terms of the language of solving problems, you know, the framework that we are using and working with respect to this specific course. हमने अब तक जो काम किया है उसमें हमारा primary objective was to give you a sense of figuring out what is the problem that we're trying to solve, right? And we've used Scrabble because Scrabble is a game that has a lot of depth, especially from a computational thinking perspective. And between board eval, between word generation, you've already gotten a sense of figuring out, what are some of the challenges or programming problems or thinking problems that you have to address. And that sort of falls under the first part of this sequence, which is mapping, enumerating, counting, and understanding problem spaces. फिर एक सेकंड पार्ट है दैट इज एनालिसिस एंड एक्सप्लोरेशन, राइट. सो जो आपने अभी वर्ड जेन की एक्सरसाइज की है, वर्ड जनरेशन की एक्सरसाइज की है इन एक्सेल, दैट इज वन वे ऑफ एक्सप्लोरिंग एंड एनालाइजिंग the requirement of a specific solution. And the reason why I say it's one way is that a lot of times one of the principles that we use, चाहे वो हम फिल्मिंग में इस्तेमाल करें, चाहे वो हम किताबें लिखने में इस्तेमाल करें, sometimes the best possible way is to actually build a rough cut solution, a crude solution, which for a fact is not going to scale, will not be deployed, but the only objective of that solution is to give you a sense of what the underlying domain is like, right? And to a large extent, the reason why we've used Excel for doing word generation, right, and this is the biggest motivation on my part, is to give you a sense of what does it take to solve the word gen problem. So you've explored the brute force approach. It's not the best approach, not the right approach, certainly not the recommended approach. But what the brute force approach done is it's given you a sense of how a bad solution looks like. Also giving you a sense of what is required to solve the problem. Also giving you a sense of what are the different dimensions and aspects of the underlying problem space which falls under the word gen area, right? And it sort of flows back and forth between the mapping and the analysis exercise. So as you map it, you come back to it, you sort of improve your solution, you modify it a bit more, then you go back again, and all that does is that gives you a sense of how better do you understand the underlying challenge. Today's class, we're going to take a step forward and we're going to move into a slightly different direction, and that direction is the next stage in our thinking, which is the design, the sense making side.